In this video, we'll be talking about the history of the American banking system. Section 2, how does the American banking system change to meet new challenges? So this is what we're going to be focusing on when it comes to this chapter or this section. Let's identify first what a bank is. See if I can see in the camera here. A bank is an institution for receiving, keeping, and lending money. So I'm sure that probably all of you probably have a bank account, and that bank account receives your money, keeps it, and it actually lends it out. That's how banks are able to make money, is by taking your money and then being able to lend it out to someone else. The American banking before Civil War. So this is really how the banking industry began. It began with an idea from the Secretary of Treasury known as Alexander Hamilton. He was considered one of the strongest for growing the government, and he was known as a Federalist. His idea is that in order for the U.S. economy to take off, we need to have a strong promotion of the industry and trade, and one of the ways we could do that is by the national bank. He proposed to have this national bank that would be available across the U.S. and then would have banks that would be chartered who would be under the influence of this Federal Reserve, or this the whole idea of a central bank that we see here. Alexander Hamilton. If you can guess who is or what bill is Alexander Hamilton on? If you would take a guess. All right, so if you know what it is, this is what it would be. It'd be a $20 bill. That's where we find Alexander Hamilton. Next, we have Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was an anti-federalist. He would have been the idealist of let's have minimal government, let's leave the power to the states, and let's keep the federal government out of it altogether. He obviously opposed the idea, and he was all for states' rights when it came to this. So his viewpoint was opposite of Alexander Hamilton. Now, what currency is Thomas Jefferson on? He is on the $2 bill. They're still around. They're not used as much as they used to. A big part of it was my understanding, I don't know if it's true or not, but that they were easy to duplicate and print and have fake bills. Now, Alexander Hamilton's idea was approved, passed Congress, and we have the creation of the first bank of the United States. We were given a 20-year charter. Basically, a charter was saying, okay, you have 20 years to prove a concept, to understand that it's going to work. In addition to that, they can collect taxes, they can print money, they can supervise charter banks. And a charter bank was a bank that agreed that they want to be backed by the national banking system. And on top of that, then they had responsibility, and they could be audited to make sure they're following the rules. Problems, though, that a lot of these banks, these charter banks that were being funded by the national bank, were not given equal opportunity to others, especially of who are common or who are of poor class, because they're too much of a risk. And at the same time, the anti-feds also claimed the banks to be unconstitutional. Well, the first charter ended, and if you were doing an active timeline, you would see that when it ended was before the second bank actually started. And the reason behind that is because Alexander Hamilton got in a duel with an individual known as Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr was, if I remember correctly, he was the vice president, or he had quite a bit of power in Congress, and he had a short temper. Alexander Hamilton kept picking on him, from my understanding, and they went out. Burr said, we're going to have a duel. They went out, and when they turned around after so many steps, Hamilton shot into the air as a gentleman, and Aaron Burr did not, and Alexander Hamilton ended up dying from the incident. So he was really the face of the idea of the first bank. Well, it wasn't until 1816 when a second bank was chartered. And what we have here is Nicholas Biddle. Nicholas Biddle was a second president, and he continued what was going on before, And in 1819, Supreme Court said that the national bank system is allowed, it is constitutional. But 1832, when the charter was up for renewal, President Jackson vetoed it. And Nicholas Biddle and President Jackson were opposed of each other. Nicholas Biddle was actually funding somebody to run against him because they didn't get along at all. That's the picture that you see there. And as a result of that, the charter was expired. Then we go through a period in the U.S. known as the free banking era, where we have complete chaos, really. It is known as the Wildcat era. It wasn't uncommon to have a bank run. So if we were to make this a modern day thing, this would be the equivalent of COVID-19 is outbreaking across the world. Everyone's running to the bank, as you see in this old picture here, and they are trying to save what they have in their accounts. And every single person is emptying out their accounts, getting all their cash. And this would happen quite often. Also, you had banks on the frontier that were not reliable. They were committing quite a bit of fraud, actually. The whole idea was they would come into town, grow the trust of the people. Everyone would put their money into this bank, and then the next day there would be a close sign, and those individuals who started that bank would be gone. They would steal everyone's money. So just complete fraud was going on. And then we had 8,000 different currencies that were being printed as well. So from 36 to 63, it was just a complete disaster. And that's why it is known as a Wildcat era. We're going to skip the bank run for now. Stability did not return to the banking system until the Civil War. This is where we really see the national bank take off and never was taken away again. 63, 64, they passed National Bank Acts. We had charter banks. We have greenbacks that were created. The reason they're called greenbacks is they were green. So paper currency issued during the Civil War. And then there was a requirement. If you are a charter bank and someone provides you gold and silver, or everything you have in your bank has to be backed by gold and silver. So if you have $1 million in cash, you need to have enough gold and silver to back that. This provided stability to the banking system and allowed people to trust in it, because now they know that if they don't want to use the paper currency, they could then get gold or silver out of it. And it provided a single national currency, so different states wouldn't have different currencies anymore. And then we have something called the gold standard. And it's not letting me move up. The word is "and" behind there. The gold standard, a monetary system in which paper money and coins have been backed by gold. This provided more confidence in the banking industry, because now if you wanted to take, let's say for instance, your $20 bill, and you want to go to the bank and get it for gold, under the gold standard, you would have the ability to do that. And then we go through a period of time where things are quite stable. We have the introduction of the Federal Reserve, and this was a result because of the expansion of the United States. Instead of having one central bank, they divided up into districts, and then in each of those districts, you would then have other banks within that district who become members. And then you actually had a Federal Reserve Board, and then the Federal Reserve Board and these Federal Reserve district areas could provide short-term loans. So let's say with the pandemic that's going on that everyone's running to Wells Fargo to get their money out. Well, Wells Fargo could reach out to the Federal Reserve and actually take out a short-term loan of cash, which then they could pay back with interest. And interesting enough, in Minnesota, we actually have one of the district banks actually located here. And on top of that, it helped create a national currency, and each district would be responsible for that. Everything was great until about 1929, stock market crash took place. As a result, nobody trusted banks. Banks were going out of business just as fast as everything else, and as a result of that, people had no longer any trust in the banking industry. What took place from here is we had a bank holiday. They reconfigured how the banking system was going to work, and FDR, under his leadership, decided to create something called the FDIC. The FDIC is something that you still use today when you go to, you see these stickers still when you go to the bank. What it means is that if the bank that you're banking at is a member of FDIC, if they go bankrupt, lose all this money, the federal government will guarantee your money. I think it's up to, I know it says $250,000, but I think they've lowered that since this time. I think it's more about 100, but I'm not 100% sure. Either way, it provided stability. It provided confidence back in the industry that if something happened to this bank or this bank disappeared on the frontier somewhere, we're fine. The Federal Reserve will back it up, and people began to put their dollars back into this. Also, the restrict redemption of gold dollars. They stopped giving out gold for this as well. We went off the gold standard in 1929 because they were printing so much money and there was no capability of being able to stay up with the gold. So if they had $5 billion in currency, they wouldn't have enough money for gold for doing that. So it would be impossible to back that. That's why today, when you go into a bank, you can't get gold and silver. So if you show them a $5 bill and you say, hey, I want this in gold, they'll laugh at you. I mean, they can't do that anymore. We had pretty strong regulations as a result of the Great Depression, of the banking system crashing. And it wasn't until the 1970s, 80s that we have the introduction of something called S&L banking industry, savings and loan. And what was taking place here is that people were putting their money into a S&L, and they would keep it in there for a period of time, and it would grow interest. And then these banks would then be able to give out the money that people have put into, savings into these banks. And then as a result of that, they could give out loans. Well, people were crying out, the banking industry was crying out for the longest time that we need to deregulate the banking industry because there's too much regulation. We have not lifted regulation since the 1920s, Great Depression, 1930s. It's time to do so. As soon as they began to deregulate, we begin to see a domino effect of savings and loan crisis begin to take place because the banking industry was so regulated that all of the interest rates were highly regulated by the Federal Reserve, which meant the S&Ls were regulated by that. As soon as they began to deregulate and allow the market value interest rates to take over, things began to be destroyed. And what is meant by that is that if you put in, let's say you put in $5,000 into your savings account, and usually the rate for that is based on how the economy is doing. And then an S&L takes your $5,000 and lends it out with you and many others to someone to buy their house. And let's say the interest rate was at 6%. Well, that means that the bank is making a 1% interest return on this. And for some reason, I don't know if my camera's not working correctly, but we're just going to continue with it right now. Let me see if I can touch it up here. That's fine. We'll just move around the side for now. So what we're seeing take place then is that we began to see these S&Ls fail. And when they failed, it created a crisis because if I'm putting my savings into a savings and loan bank and the market value is 5%, and now all of a sudden my market value jumps up to 10%, I'm getting a 10% return. Well, all the loans that the S&L has been giving out, well, that would then be reduced. That would mean the loans that they're giving out are fixed rates. And what a fixed rate means is that it's going to be the same interest rate through the entire time. So if an S&L is giving out mortgage loans at a fixed rate for the next 30 years, and people are putting their money in for savings and they're getting a 10% return, it's going to collapse on itself because the S&L does not have any money coming in or any interest that they're earning, which then means that they're using more of the money in the savings account, which then means they don't have enough money for other loans, and it just completely collapsed. And as a result of it, you can see a great percentage of these failed. In 1989, the whole idea was kind of abolished. So, question for you on this one. I'm going to split this section in half because it is kind of long, and you can think about this, and when we return, we will answer this question of this chapter.